Good. So yes, oops, I need to put that forward. Do we have a problem, do we, Ben? Bit too bright, is it? Ben, I'm not able to move it forward at the moment. Sorry about this, just some slight technical problems. It'll be all fixed in a moment. Need a test pattern, we do, don't we? Or, yeah. Now we can, we go. Excellent. So when I was 3 years old, my family moved into what would become our family home. You know, I was old enough in my family to be one of the ones that was around before we moved into the family home. And for a 3-year-old, particularly I'm thinking of my sort of ages between 3 and sort of about 6, the most important part of the home was the backyard, definitely. I see some people nodding, yes, they understood that. That's right, it was the most important part of the backyard. So I thought what I would do is show you, well, create for you a picture of my backyard, or at least the most important part. So here is my backyard. Actually, we have to add a bit, don't we? So we'll add a bit and I'll show you. And this is a section of my backyard. It's unfortunate Kesh isn't here because she could have verified the truth of this. All right? Yes, she could be saying that. So at the back there was a fence, which in most backyards there are fences, aren't there? Now actually, I couldn't find a corrugated iron steel fence to do as a picture, so this is what I've given you, sorry. It was a corrugated iron. And truth is, and you look at it and there's nothing behind it, because when I was 3 and I looked at the back fence, there was nothing behind it, because I was too small to see. You know, later on I could see the Sandico's house over the back fence, but that's all I could see at 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 probably. So we had a back fence, and on the sort of that corner of the back fence, I'm not sure it'll be that corner now, was this thing. This was, to most of my family, this was called the old cubby house. But when I was 3, 4 and 5, it was called the cubby house, because it was the cubby house that we had. It was also the shed, but it was all we had for a cubby house, and all our outdoor toys were in there and things like that. Now, it actually wasn't quite in the corner. There was sort of on the side of it, on the fence side of it, there was an incinerator. Do you remember those? Yeah. And a compost heap there. We had actually these big concrete compost things that we had there, so on the side of it, but I haven't put them in, I'm sorry. And running across the front of it, really important for me, was a path. And the path actually went right round the yard, and I could do a massive circle on my little tractor thing that I had, you know, and I'd zoom around, and then a bit later I had a scooter that I'd zoom around on, and yeah, that's the thing you do, isn't it? Important stuff. So we had that, and then, now I'm only going to show a section. I had a big backyard. It was really big, certainly for a little guy. It was huge. And I'm showing you to the point that was really important to me in a sense, was that we had a tree there, and that was a plum tree. And the plum tree had those big plums. And so every January, late January, the ground would be full of squishy plums. You know, that's how it worked. There was beyond it, in a section that was all just dirt and messy, there was a peach tree and an orange tree as well beyond it on this side of it. I have to look the other way around, don't I? And then just next to it, but smaller than it, was an orange tree. So we had 2 orange trees. And then in front of the cubby house was a very small, and it never really grew, and I don't know why, mandarin tree. So that's what I would look at if I was looking out our dining room window. That's the thing I would see. There actually was a bunch more other stuff on the side here, but this is the important stuff. So my backyard, this was where I played. I suppose that's why it's important, isn't it? But I've left out a few things. Some things that, I have a bunch of friends that I still see, a couple of them at least, from that era. One of them is a guy named Gregor Dingwall. I still see him quite regularly when I go to the Glenelg Football Oval. Another friend, Matthew Miles, I see once in a while. And another friend, David Brow, were the probably the main ones around them. David moved to Sydney, so I don't see him so much. But they remind me, particularly Matthew, seems to remind me regularly that I had other things in my backyard, or at least I told him I had other things. Because the other thing in my backyard was a blue whale. I don't remember telling him this, but he reminds me whenever he sees me that I had a blue whale in my backyard. So I must have told him that, mustn't I? Some stage I had a blue whale in my backyard. Now, like I said, I can't remember saying that, but I have had enough other people say that I said it to think it's probably true. I probably said it with all authority. I have a blue whale in my backyard, yes. How it lived there, I don't know. What it did, that it really can't survive out of water, but I must have had a big enough puddle there or something for a blue whale to live there. And then, now this one had some verification, something behind it. I remember doing, as a little kid, you dig things up, and I dug up some bones. And so obviously we had a dinosaur in my backyard as well, as many little kids do. I think my son had various dinosaurs in our backyard. So that one had a little bit behind it. But there was one actually that was interesting that I did tell them that had something behind it, but I reckon my 3-4-year-old head didn't fully understand, because we had a section to the side of the house that as soon as we got there, Mum and Dad had plans. They bought the house with plans to extend it, mostly because we already had 4 kids when we moved in there, and Mum was pregnant with a 5th, and they certainly didn't have plans to stop there. So, and we had builders come in quite early, and we used to have this big fernery thing on the side, and they smashed it all down. And I'd heard them talk about something gold they found. Now, it probably was like a necklace or a ring or an earring or something, but I just told my friends, we've got gold in our backyard. Now, I don't know if when you were a kid, you said these sorts of things as well. I don't know. I don't know when it stopped me saying these things. Maybe 20 or something. No, I reckon, you get to an age, probably about 7, when you start to see things real. Before that, everything's magical, isn't it? And so it's probably sort of 3 through 6. My backyard was amazing. It was the greatest place on earth. Why would a little kid say those things? It's funny, isn't it? But see, we all have to be important somehow, don't we? We all have to have something that's important for us and makes us important. So these things make me important. My blue whale, my dinosaur, my gold. So what makes you important? What is it that makes you important? So we've been looking through what I've called Hope for Living, some foundational stuff, and I've tried to put it all in a nutshell here in just some very quick statements. We've looked at the Father, Son and Spirit are the core of our faith, aren't they? The community of love and unity who send the Son to redeem creation, creating the new creation, which we're a part of, the new creation. If you're in Christ, you are a new creation. And then we talked about us being the church, Jesus' worshipping assembly, who respond to God's love and mercy, disciples sent to make disciples in the power of the Spirit, loving each other. And then last week, does anyone remember what we spoke about last week? Money. We did sort of talk about money, but actually it was giving was the main thing, wasn't it? We give ourselves as Christ first gave. That was the idea. So I talked about money at first because that's the main thing people think when they think of giving, but actually no, it's giving ourselves, giving us. That is key. And so this is the last in my series, and there was something that we spoke about last week that I wanted to touch base on again. Something that, a bit of scripture that was quite important. It was in 1 Peter 4:10, and I said last week we'd look at this week, so we are. It said, just as each one has received a gift, serve each other as good stewards of the varied grace of God. Now, and I did mention it last week, I believe, that word grace there and the word gift are actually the same word in Greek, basically. But the grace one's just said in a slightly different way, and it means the givingness of God. That's what it means. So just as each one has received a gift from God's givingness. Makes sense, doesn't it? It says, serve one another as good stewards of the varied grace of God. So there's a bit of scripture that everyone goes to about gifts. Does anyone know what that might be? What's it? You said 13. Actually, the gifts bit is 12, isn't it? Yes. 1 Corinthians 12 is the most commonly sought out bit on gifts, isn't it? For those that know, for those that don't, this is good to learn. I've been going through a lot of them really well-known scriptures. And today I want to actually look at 1 Corinthians 12 and the gift-givingness of God and the gifts he gives us to give and what it means and what it's about and the core of that giving. So let's have a look at that. This is 1 Corinthians 12. So I'm actually going to read through the whole thing, but we'll go through it slowly and look at bits as we go, hopefully. He starts off and says, with regard to spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. You know that when you were pagans, you were often led astray by speechless idols, however you were led. That's a really weird start, isn't it? He says, I want to talk about spiritual gifts, basically. I don't want you to be uninformed. And what does he remind them of? Yeah, what they used to do. You know, whenever I used to read this, I just threw that bit aside because I thought it had nothing to do with what was coming up. Because I don't think we're very good at reading whole passages. And I didn't understand that he had something behind it. Now, it also didn't help that I'm not a Roman Greek person from the first century. So what I want you to do today is put on your first century Romano-Greek head and think like one of them. Is that okay? Can you do that? All right, maybe you don't know how to do that, so I'll help you a bit as we go. So it's interesting, he talks about, when you were pagan and you worshipped idols. So that's actually going to be important in what we're talking about. He says, so I want you to understand that no one speaking by the Spirit of God says Jesus is cursed, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. So he's setting up something here. He's saying, you used to do this, but actually things are different now. Because the Holy Spirit is the one running the show. And things need to be different. One of the problems that we have nowadays is in their world, they all understood a thing called rhetoric, which was a way of speaking and a way of getting people to understand things. And Paul is really good at it. He just used it. He loved it. But it was actually the way everyone spoke. You were taught how to speak it if you went to any sort of college, but also because you just listened to others doing it, you did it. That's how. You don't even think of the things you're doing when you do it. It's an ancient thing. The old Greeks all did it. Aristotle wrote down a whole thing on how to do it. And so it was a really common thing. And he's doing that here a bit. And we'll see that as we go. He says, now there are different gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are different ministries, but the same Lord. And there are different results, but the same God who produces all of them in everyone. So who's the one who gives gifts? God. Excellent. That's a really important thing to understand. Sounds basic so far, doesn't it? It is. It's God that's giving you the gifts. To each person, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the benefit of all. For one person is given through the Spirit the message of wisdom, and another the message of knowledge according to the same Spirit. To another, faith by the same Spirit, and to another, gifts of healing by the one Spirit. Sort of saying the same thing over and over again, by the one Spirit, by the one Spirit. He's trying to get at something, isn't he? To another, performance of miracles, to another, prophecy, and to another, discernment of spirits, to another, different types of tongues, and to another, the interpretation of tongues. It is one and the same Spirit distributing as he decides to each person who produces all these things. How is this connected to the bit we talked about earlier? That he reminds them that they were pagans. What's that, sorry?
There was no Spirit.
It's not that, actually. It's worse. These guys, the Corinthians, are really practiced at spiritual manifestations. Before they were Christian, they were practiced at spiritual manifestations. See, it's hard for us, and this is why I wanted to sort of show this in a stark way, in a sense. It's hard for us to understand this because we come from, most of us here are from Australian background, or some from, got some Chinese, but we don't have, I don't know how much the Chinese have this, but when I go to Papua New Guinea, everyone there understands spiritual things. And their whole life in their village is full of spiritual things happening. And when they come to Christ, they have to transfer that spirituality and understanding to Christ. What I find in Australia, of course, we've been taught that there is no spirit world. There's nothing happening. And so when we read this, we think Paul is telling us for the first time these things happen. It's actually not. He's telling them, you know this stuff, but where did they come from originally? Where did these manifestations come from back in your pagan days? Came from the gods, didn't they? The gods gave you wisdom. The gods gave you this stuff. Now, interestingly, and Corinth is really an interesting place because it's across the bay from Corinth is a place called Delphi. Does anyone know about Delphi? A few people nodding. There are some people. The Oracle at Delphi. Very important place. In the Greco-Roman world, there were a bunch of... there was a priestess, usually the main one, who would go down into this place, and we now know it's most likely that there was noxious fumes from some volcanic vents there that meant that she'd get a bit out of it, a bit loopy, and come up and start speaking. And interestingly, some reports have her speaking gibberish, and the priests there would interpret for them. Some of the reports have her saying actual prophecies and things, and that because she was in this state, heightened state. And so actually, the Corinthians knew this stuff really well. And they came to Christ and they had similar stuff happening. Only it was not from the gods, was it? It was from God himself. It's hard for us to get our head on that, isn't it? From an Australian, very, secular understanding of everything in the world. But actually, all these things they had from their old gods in some way. But now the real God's doing it. So it's different. All right, so that's good to know, isn't it? What have we got next? He moves on. He says, just as the body is one, and yet has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so too is Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks or slaves or free. We were all made to drink of the one Spirit. For in fact the body is not a single member, but many. If the foot says, since I am not a hand, I am not part of the body, it does not lose its membership in the body because of that. And if the ear says, since I am not an eye, I am not part of the body, it does not lose its membership in the body because of that. If the whole body were an eye, what part would do the hearing? If the whole were an ear, what part would exercise the sense of smell? But as a matter of fact, God has placed each of the members in the body just as he decided. If they were all the same member, where would the body be? So now there are many members, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I do not need you, nor in turn can the head say to the foot, I do not need you. All right. That's a wonderful sounding thing, isn't it? And when I have always read that before, I've read it as, we're all a bit of the body, and that's, and you can be, the bit that you're meant to be, and you'll make up the body, which it does say. But we don't have our Greco-Roman head on when we think that. Because always the next verse really confused me. And it confused me for good reason. Because then sort of speaks, Paul seems to speak like he's saying, but that's all wrong. You're going, well, hang on, what? It's because we don't know, and one of the beautiful things is now we can study and we can find out a bit more, and what Paul is doing here is actually presenting something that was constantly presented in the Greco-Roman world. All the time they heard about the body, that the whole empire is a body. It was a really big thing to hear. And what I love, one of the earliest versions of this is from actually over 500 years beforehand. And it was still in Rome, near the very beginning of Rome. And this is a guy named Menenius Agrippa. He was from sort of, you'd call early 5th and even late 6th century BC. So a long time ago, in the early days of Rome. And he has this fable, and I like this fable. There are actually many others. Aesop has a fable a little like this, talking about the body's function. So let's have a look. There's a reason I want to talk about Menenius' one. At the time when the parts of the human body did not, as now, all agree together. I love that. Did you know there was a time in history when the body parts didn't agree? I don't think it happened, but that's okay. But the several members had each their own counsel and their own language. The other parts were indignant that, while everything was provided for the gratification of the belly by their labour and service, the belly, resting calmly in their midst, did nothing but enjoy the pleasures afforded it. It's great, isn't it? Beautiful sort of setup. Oh, the belly, and when you think about it, what does the belly do? I know earlier today, my belly was grumbling terribly. Feed me, feed me. That's what it does, doesn't it? You know, feed me. It's a great story. Belly just does that, and the rest of the body's getting angry, isn't it? You just sit there and demand, but you do nothing. Well done, isn't it? They accordingly entered into a conspiracy that neither should the hands convey food to the mouth, nor the mouth receive it, nor the teeth have anything to chew. So the teeth are gritting. So they're stopping anything getting in, aren't they? That'll serve the belly right, won't it? That'll show the belly who's boss. Do you think it will? Of course not. He goes on with this story. While desiring, under the influence of this indignation, to starve out the belly, the individual members themselves and the entire body were reduced to the last degree of emaciation. In other words, they're starving and they're struggling. Oh, we can't do anything. Oh, what's happening? What's gone wrong? Oh. Thence it became apparent that the office of the belly as well was no idle one, that it did not receive more nourishment than it supplied, sending as it did to all parts of the body that blood from which we derive life and vigour, distributed equally through the veins when perfected by the digestion of the food. All right. What do you think of that as a story? Great story, isn't it? Fanciful. Now I want you to think about who the belly is. In 5th century BC Rome, who's he talking about when he's talking about the belly? He's talking about the leaders, isn't he? What they called the patricians. And what this was actually in response to was there was an uprising from the plebeians, the normal people, not the slaves, they were below, but the ones sort of the next level up, the plebeians that were free still, but because they were working hard and all the patricians did was sit there and enjoy the food. And so what is Menenius Agrippa saying? Quite incredible, isn't it? What's he saying? He's saying, actually, no, these guys have an important job and you better leave them alone. Let them stay there eating the food and enjoying it. Do you like this story now? It's not very good for Australian sort of thinking. It's terrible for Australian thinking. We think, that's terrible. No. This is ancient thinking. They're really big on this. And so this fable sort of grew in its telling, and often the writers of the time would use this analogy for the importance of the structure, the importance of having to have these people above you, having to have these people that don't do much work at all and eat everything, keeping that structure. Certainly, probably about 70 BC, Cicero writes during the war of Caesar and Ptolemy's war, and he writes to push how important it is that when Caesar wins that he's there and he can rule and have every right to do, because the body needs it. And even in Paul's time, when Paul's writing this stuff, there's a guy named Lucan who writes the same stuff, saying this has got to be, and there's plenty of other times that it's said. So when Paul says this, let's have a look again at what Paul says. When he says this, what do you think they're thinking? For just as the body is one and yet has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so too is Christ. For in one Spirit we're all baptized into one body, whether Jews, Greeks, or slaves, or free. We're all made to drink of the one Spirit. For in fact the body is not a single member, but many. And then he goes on that if the foot says, if the hand says, since I'm not an eye. Sounding a lot like the stuff that Agrippa said, that Cicero said, that Lucan said, you know. If the whole body were an eye, what part will do the hearing? We need all the bits, don't we? God places each of the members in the body just as he decides. What do you think that the writers from the Roman world said about who put the belly where it was? God put it there, didn't it? The gods have ordained this. So it's interesting to look at, isn't it? When we look at 1 Corinthians 12 and see the body, actually the first thing they would have thought about is they would have heard the ordering of the world according to status. That's what they would have seen Paul saying, yep, the world is ordered according to status, this is the right thing. It's not what we tend to read, is it? Because we've got a very egalitarian ideal in society. People still complain it's not truly equal, yes, but relative to back then, way, way better. And actually Paul's a lot of the reason for that. Even worse, he says that it's given by God, isn't it? Back in those days, the patricians and the leaders, they would have all the money and things, but what you would do, you would attach yourself to one of them and they would become your benefactor and they would give you gifts. They would give gifts to you and you would go off and you'd be able to use that. A gift might even be a job or might be, just things you need. But what you would have to do is praise them back. Quite often, in the morning, you would have to go and stand under their balcony and yell to the townsfolk around, praise be my benefactor, he is the great benefactor, and say all wonderful things about that benefactor. So the benefactor knows that you're doing things right. It's a very different world than us, isn't it? So when we read this, Paul seems to be saying, keep the social order intact, doesn't he? When I read those bits with a Greco-Roman head, he's saying, keep the social order intact. Make sure things are in the right level. Do you think he's really saying that? No, and this is part of rhetoric. He builds you up thinking a certain way. And then he goes, snap, no, the other way. That's what he does, and that's what he does now. On the contrary. So you're thinking that we give honor to the ones that are up there, that are the important ones. It says, on the contrary, those members that seem to be weaker are essential. And those members we consider less honourable, we clothe with greater honour. See, this now makes a bit of sense, this bit. If you read this before with a head that he was actually saying that earlier, why is he saying on the contrary? We're saying on the contrary because their head is in a space already. Their head's in a space thinking about position and status. He's saying, no way. It's not what we have here. In fact, we give honour to the lower. We give honour to the slaves. That's just unheard of. That's wrong in a Greco-Roman world. Stunning, isn't it? I love when you find out these things about Scripture, and particularly Paul, the way he writes. It's very clever. He says, what we consider less honourable, we clothe with greater honour, and our unpresentable members are clothed with dignity. But our presentable members do not need this. They don't need it, do they? The ones in church who are patricians, there were often one or two at best, they didn't need the honour, did they? But the slaves that came in needed honour, didn't they? They needed to be given that honour. Instead, God has blended together the body, giving greater honour to the lesser member, so that there may be no division in the body. There's no division. No greater, no lesser. When I think about that for nowadays, we don't come in with that sort of thing, but certainly, I know in many churches, if you're on the pastoral team, if you're the pastor, you have the greatest honour. Yeah, I'm not getting that, am I? That's good. I don't need that, nor should I. I should get the honour that I deserve for being who I am. That's as simple as that, just as you should. So there may be no division, but the members may have mutual concern for one another. That's interesting, isn't it? Such a different idea. Whereas in their ordered status, you have concern for the ones above and you worry about them and you do what they say. Here it's actually no, it's for one another. It's concern for one another. If one member suffers, everyone suffers with it. If a member is honoured, all rejoice with it. It's true, isn't it? If you hurt your little toe, is it just your little toe suffering? In fact, it's one of the worst things to hurt, isn't it? If you hurt your little toe and you're trying to walk around, everything is bad, isn't it? When you wake up with a crick in the neck, everything's bad, isn't it? We suffer when the littlest member, when the thing that shouldn't be that important, like the little toe, we suffer with it. And this is the real body, not the Greco-Roman body, he's saying, isn't it? All right. So, is he saying keep the social order intact? No, he's saying on the contrary, those members that seem to be weaker are essential. It's not social order, is it? Not social order at all that's important. But what is important? All right, we better find that out. We'll finish this off finding that out, hopefully. Let's have a look. Now, you are Christ's body, and each of you is a member of it. And God has placed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, gifts of healing, helps, gifts of leadership, different kinds of tongues. Again, people tend to rank these things, don't they? He's told us just before, don't rank them, hasn't he? Helps, gifts of leadership, different kinds of tongues. Not all are apostles, are they? Not all are prophets, are they? Not all are teachers, are they? Not all perform miracles, do they? Not all have gifts of healing, do they? Not all speak in tongues, do they? Not all interpret, do they? But you should be eager for the greater gifts. Let's be eager. And now I will show you something that is far better. What does he say next? He says the thing that everyone says at weddings, doesn't he? Which isn't about weddings at all, actually. It's about spiritual gifts and the use of spiritual gifts. Though I speak with the tongues of angels and men and have not love, I'm a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal, aren't I? Though I prophesy all things, have all knowledge, all things. There's a few more in there I've just forgotten, and I did know them off by heart. They've lost my head. No, it's next. That's all right. But have not love, I am nothing, he says. Though I give my body to be burned, I give myself totally. If I don't have love, it's worth nothing. That's incredible, isn't it? See, the Corinthians were very, very good at spiritual gifts. They knew how to use them. They knew that they could speak right, they could speak out, they could do all these things. In fact, it was a bit messy what they were doing. But Paul's saying, but you guys got it all wrong. You're doing it thinking it's out of a social order thing, trying to be higher, trying to be up bigger, be important. Is that what it should be about? Being important? Not at all. No. On the contrary, those members that seem to be weaker are essential. See, it's not social order, but to bless one another in love. That's the absolutely key thing. That's why he breaks into what seems to be a discussion about spiritual gifts, breaks it in half and puts a whole chapter in there about love. It's not actually different. He's saying this is where spiritual gifts come from. This is where words of knowledge come from. This is where prophecy comes from. This is where tongues and interpretation come from. All these things come from love, or they're worthless. Stunning thing to say, isn't it? Doesn't mean you don't do them. He says actually seek for them. They're good. But the key thing is that we bless one another in them. Key thing is that we do it in love. That's the absolute key. And I think when we do that, it's a different thing. You know, when I was young, a young Christian, and the idea of doing spiritual gifts things came up, I know it was a lot about me. And whether God could speak through me or not, and whether that made me important or not. I think maybe some of you have felt that too. It's the wrong motive, isn't it? It's the wrong place. Where is it from? Loving those people. Loving all those around you, just as Christ loves you. We're going to spend a bit of time. I thought it'd be good just to have a bit of time of prayer, and then if you have a word for someone or even for the whole church, it'd be good to speak it out. We will turn off the thing in a moment. So to those online, God bless you all. I hope you've enjoyed this and got something out of it. Thanks, Ben. You can turn them off. I thought it'd be good. We'll just have a bit of time.